This is Coffee with God, and I am Father Jose. Let us begin this day with the Word of God and a short reflection.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke, chapter 24, verses 13 to 35. The passage is taken from the Message version of the Bible. That same day, two of them were walking to the village Emmaus, about 7 miles out of Jerusalem. They were deep in conversations, going over all these things that had happened. In the middle of their talk and questions, Jesus came up and walked along with them, but they were not able to recognize who he was. He asked, "What's this you're discussing so intensely as you walk along?" They just stood there, long-faced, like they had lost their best friend. The one of them, his name was Cleopas, said, "Are you the only one in Jerusalem who hasn't heard what's happened during the last few days?" He said, "What has happened?" They said, "The things that happened to Jesus the Nazarene. He was a man of God, a prophet, dynamic in work and word, blessed by both God and all the people. Then our high priests and the leaders betrayed him, got him sentenced to death, and crucified him. And we had our hopes up that he was the one about to deliver Israel. And it is now the 3rd day since it happened. But now some of our women have completely confused us. Early this morning, they were at the tomb and couldn't find his body. They came back with a story that had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of our friends went off to the tomb to check and found it empty, just as the women said, but they didn't see Jesus." Then he said to them, "So thick-headed, so slow-hearted, why can't you simply believe all that the prophets said? Don't you see that these things had to happen, that the Messiah had to suffer and only then enter into his glory?" Then he started at the beginning with the books of Moses and went on through all the prophets, pointing out everything in the scriptures that referred to him. They came to the edge of the village where they were headed. He acted if he was going on, but they pressed him. "Stay and have supper with us. It's nearly evening. The day is done." So he went in with them, and here is what happened. He sat down at the table with them. Taking the bread, he blessed and broke and gave it to them. At that moment, open-eyed, wide-eyed, they recognized him, and then he disappeared. Back and forth, they talked. Didn't we feel on fire as he conversed with us on the road, as he opened up the scriptures for us? They didn't waste a minute. They were up and on their way back to Jerusalem. They found the 11 and their friends gathered together, talking away. "It's really happened. The Master has been raised up. Simon saw him." Then the two went over everything that happened on the road and how they recognized him when he broke the bread. The Gospel of the Lord.
Reflections on the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, chapter 24, verses 13 to 35. It is the month of April in the year 30. Two disciples of Jesus who lost all their hope with the killing of Jesus, their teacher and prophet, are on their way back to Emmaus, a village 20 miles away from Jerusalem. Luke's Gospel says Emmaus was just 7 miles from Jerusalem, which is a mistake. This episode also raises in us a number of questions. Why couldn't the disciples recognize Jesus during their whole day's journey and conversation? The text says that their eyes were kept from recognizing him, a kind of blindness. It indicates that the risen Christ had something different in his appearance. That Mary Magdalene, Peter and the other apostles, they could not recognize him when they first met him after the resurrection. Because resurrection from death does not mean going back to one's previous life, but entering into the world of God. We must also pay attention to the sentence describing Jesus at table with the disciples. When he was at table with them, he took bread, said the blessing, broke it, and gave it to them. Luke explicitly recreates the celebration of the Eucharist. While they were still on the road, Jesus presided over the liturgy of the Word. Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them in all the scriptures what was written about the Messiah. And later, at the breaking of the bread, they recognized the Lord. Luke wrote the Gospel around the year 80 and 90 AD. Almost all the witnesses of the risen Lord are by now dead. The rabbis taught that the Messiah would live 1,000 years. They expected a glorious Messiah, a mighty and triumphant king. But Jesus instead was defeated and killed. Their dreams are collapsed and their plans have failed. It is the story of the Christian communities of Luke. They are persecuted, victims of abuse. They see the victory of the evil. The wicked are better off than the pure in heart. They find themselves in the same state of mind as the disciples traveling to Emmaus. Many Christians behave that way in the face of difficulties and persecution. Some abandoned their communities. Others refused answers that came from faith. It is our own story. We too are like the disciples to Emmaus. We know well what Jesus did and taught, but this knowledge is incomplete. Without faith in the resurrection, our defeats are defeats, and life ends with death, a senseless tragedy. An important element of this passage, the disciples on the road to Emmaus, as soon as they recognize the Lord, they rush to announce their discovery to their brothers and sisters, and with them proclaim their faith. The Lord is truly risen.